morning, good evening, everyone. This is Abhinav Agarwal, your host for today, and welcome to this Indic Book Club open house with Otis. We have, Otis tells me, 3 submissions for review this week, so this is excellent. We should get a good diverse discussion going on. And for those of you who are joining this, or those of you who end up watching the recording of this online, and we do make this available on YouTube a few days after the event. This is Indic Book Club's open house for writers, so it is open for anyone and everyone who wants to get feedback from Otis, who is not only an accomplished writer and author himself, but he's also been a Stanford fellow. So we invite you to send in your writing pieces, 750, 800 words in length approximately. Send it as a PDF, Times New Roman, font size 12. Double spaced. That gives him enough space and space to work with and provide his feedback, and he will send it back to you. And then on Sundays we will go over the pieces. He will share those pieces, talk about some of the best practices about writing and so on. And anyone is more than free to join. You can ask questions, clarifications. You can challenge Otis on the notions of what is good writing or not. And just to make sure you were paying attention, Otis, and thank you, you were. Sorry about that. So the intent is essentially all of us can become better writers by understanding what are the elements of good writing, number one, and also seeing other writing pieces and what are some of the do's and don'ts and feedback and so on. So by all means, make use of this. You can join us and the conversation on Twitter at Indic Book Club, on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Indic Book Club. And we have all of the past videos, more than about, I think we're up to 29 now on YouTube. So with that, I will turn this over to you, Otis.
Great. Thanks so much. One of the things I've done is I watched a video about my mic, so I'm hoping that my mic is going to be better this week. So keep it close, I've heard. And I've also heard that the gain thing is not a volume. So that's not a true. When I was like, okay, finally, he got it. Okay, so I have 3 pieces. Is Jay here?
Jay is here. Yes. I've just promoted him to panelist, so his video should be, yes, there he is.
Oh, good. I need a Jay because I have, let's see, oh wait, I'm in the wrong thing here. I have a piece from Ram and Jay, and they are, I think my comments about these pieces are somewhat the same. And I have a piece from Deepa where my comment on that piece is a little bit different. So for both of these pieces, Ram and Jay's piece, we're going to talk a little bit about skin in the game, basically. The tension that we create when we bring protagonists and antagonists together. Jay, tell us a little bit about this piece.
Otis, we can't see your screen.
Okay, right. I get that. Okay, Abhinav, if you've disappeared, you have to enable my screen sharing.
Can I go now?
Let's see. I'm waiting for Abhinav to share your screen so that we can all see your piece.
Trying to figure out the technology out here can be very intimidating. And yes, okay, I'll screen. Where is the screen option? Play sound, ask all. Okay, where do I ask you to share? Okay, you should be able to share your screen now, Otis.
Okay. Yes, I can. Thank you. Yeah, Jay, tell us a little bit about this piece.
Okay, so this piece has somebody who's sitting in her home waiting for somebody else to arrive. And during her wait, she is reliving some aspects of her past. And for lack of a better audience, she is having a conversation with a lizard, which is the only other entity that she can talk to in the room.
Right. Can you do you mind reading a little bit? Let's say let me go to here. Just that first section.
But then, am I any smarter? The lizard clicked its tongue in sympathy, stopping as the clock struck 9. She sat up as the lizard anchored its forelegs on the wall and raised its head to look at her. In the yellow lighting of the room, she thought that its beady eyes appeared to have a tinge of brown. The street was lit bright and white, but the neem tree growing outside had embraced the window, walling each world from mixing with the other. Every time its leaves rustled in the breeze, she looked to the door and sighed. He was late, as usual.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Jay, this is something that I noticed in your work a long time ago, is that you really have an inventiveness with language and your vision. The things that you come up with and the way you describe them are really novel, and I think that that's a very, very strong base. Particularly, I mean, the idea of this lizard there, you know, but then am I any smarter? The lizard. So, but then am I any smarter? I'm not sure who's thinking that. The way it's formed is the lizard would be thinking it. But anyway, and I'll find out that the lizard will participate a little bit more actively in this piece later on. The lizard clicked its tongue in sympathy, stopping as the clock struck 9. I mean, it's just weird, Jay, and I really like weird. I think it's a very good thing for writers to have. It's kind of a strange outlook. And I was reminded in this piece a little bit. Have you read much of the Russian realists? Do you read Russian literature?
Some translations, yes.
Okay, yeah. Nikolai Gogol, wrote The Nose. So that collection of short stories. This reminds me a little bit of that, and
Okay.
There's other work that's like this too. I mean, if you haven't read 100 Years of Solitude, I think you should read that by Marquez.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of. Have you read Milan Kundera?
No, I've heard of the other ones that you mentioned, but this one I haven't even heard about. So,
okay. Well, you need to be reading a lot more weird stuff. Okay, so I think you just find weird stuff that you can read and read as much of it as you can, and just be influenced by the weirdest stuff that you can find.
Okay.
I think it's really great. It's a great perspective. So I really like that. The thing that I'm going to concentrate on in terms of my comments is this issue of, well, skin in the game, we call it, right? So we know this phrase, skin in the game, but I wanted to delve into it a little bit more. Like, what does it mean to have skin in the game? It basically means something about having a condition of threat of some kind. And that's what we're basically constructing. Jay, I'm gonna have you mute your microphone. Great, thank you. So, skin in the game means that we talk about having a protagonist who has the capacity to be hurt. That's what it means to have skin in the game. There's a stake. And in a sense, when we say skin, we mean a physical stake of some kind. Oh, wait, come on, we can't all disappear. I'm just talking to people's names. I feel lonely. I feel depressed. I feel isolated in the modern world. These are, thank you, thank you. The conditions of the modern world, right? I'm here talking to myself. So when we say skin in the game, we're basically saying that there's a physical person who is under threat of some kind. This is what creates the tension of our work. If there's no physical person who is under any kind of threat, there is essentially no tension. And tension is the main thing we use to engage the reader. What the reader is doing, right? The reader is living a physical experience, right? I talk about the physical a lot. The reader is living a physical life in which they're under threat. If I cross the street, I can be hit by a car. If I talk to my partner, she can make me feel bad. My kids kick me in the shins. So I live this physical life. We basically, in our stories, we reproduce that sense of physical threat. And what happens is the reader who is feeling threat in their world all the time is able to go, or they're feeling threat, or maybe they're feeling vastly bored. Because they feel so much threat, they isolate themselves in their house and they live a small life there, right? So they get to go into our world, experience a physical threat in safety, right? That is the key element. That's why they escape their world and go to ours, because it's exciting and it is safe. It's two things, exciting and safe. For this to happen, for us to create a sense of skin in the game, by which I mean threat, we need to use the forces of protagonism and antagonism. So, Jay, I love the inventiveness here, but there's something that I've noticed. I've said this about my partner's work. She's a great writer, inventive, has language like you do. I mean, she's really talented. I've never been talented. I just work hard. You know, that's it. I'm like a mundane, I just shovel. I'm a great shoveler. Okay, that's what I do. But she's really got this language gift, and you have that too. But she starts all her work like the person wakes up, they're in bed. I joked with her that her collection of short stories should be titled "Starts in Bed." She's talented, but don't start in bed. So there's no threat there, right? Oh, I'm waking up. What is the threat? I mean, maybe it makes sense to her. The threat is the day itself. I mean, it's true that she likes to stay in bed a lot. So the day itself is so threatening, whatever's going to happen in it. But we like to try and have it be a little bit more acute. Then if we think about it, and your piece really made me think about this in a new way. How should I say? This woman, right, is the protagonist. The lizard is not an adequate antagonist. That's basically what I'm going to say. The lizard itself is not an adequate antagonist for an actual physical threat. Which is, I mean, when I say physical threat, I'm trying to include emotional threat that's meaningful too. Like my partner, right, Zandi, she's not going to physically threaten me, but if she says something that damages me emotionally, it finally has a physical ramification, right? This is the person who is my partner. We're in life together. We're trying to survive together. And now I feel like we're not a team and I feel under threat. So there is a physical ramification down the line for that emotional threat. Let me have your piece here. what I kind of noticed, and this is the new thing that I came up with. Do you see this picture? I said skin in the game. So I'm going to start off with this. Sorry, I mean to just not that little square. So what I thought about was that when we construct our stories, we often construct stories that begin essentially with the protagonist being somewhat, it's a power relationship. To have a physical threat, I've often said we want the antagonist and the protagonist to be equals, right? I've said that many times. So I'm sort of reevaluating that a little bit. They are equals, basically, and essentially equals, equal forces. But our representation of them is often that the protagonist is smaller and weaker and less powerful than the antagonist. That creates more tension. We'll see in the relationships that we develop in literature that you often have, for example, it could be lovers, right? It could be a child and a parent. But what I kind of thought about is that you don't often see the protagonist being a parent and the antagonist being a child. Not often. That's because essentially we understand that the power relationship of the child is smaller than that of the parent. Right? We see a lot of the protagonist is a single person versus a large group, right? Or we see the single person versus an authority of some kind. We see in some nonfiction, Jay, you're here twice, that's strange. We see in some nonfiction, I'm thinking of The Perfect Storm by Sebastian Junger, some individuals on a fishing boat against the vast weather system, right? In John Krakauer's Into Thin Air, we see the little rich climbers against Everest, right? So those relationships, those sort of disparate power relationships between the smaller protagonist and the larger antagonist elicits more of this feeling of threat and skin in the game. So I hadn't thought that before. So that's a new thing to me, or a new way to kind of understand it. So I went from that and basically started thinking about how the process of story works. And I came up with a new thing. So it seems to me that in the first scene, we have the representation of the protagonist. Maybe I'll do something else. Okay, I'm going to do this. The protagonist here in yellow, smaller, diminished, the child, right? Versus the group of bullies or the cool kids in high school or whatever. You just a collection of stronger personalities, right? They come into conflict with that larger force. And they lose, right? Because I've talked about this before. A story is about try and fail, try and fail, try and fail. The next time they come into it, they're even smaller and more diminished. The antagonistic force is even larger and more solidified. Try and fail. That's why, in a sense, the story's movement is about the triumph of the human spirit, basically. So, and the triumph of the human spirit as emblemized, I don't know what word I want to choose, but as Abhinav, thank you. Epitomized, I don't know. But anyway, the triumph of the human spirit as captured in the struggle of the protagonist. So the next scene, they're even smaller, right? And they're against an even larger force. I think of all these Hollywood movies do this constantly, right? So you have, I always think of Die Hard with Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis is just a guy, just going to see his parents, and he's on a plane and he takes off his shoes and he has whatever, a duck. Meantime, there's a group of terrorists in a building. Okay? Small little Bruce Willis, terrorists, right? Then he gets off, he finds out that they've taken over the building. It's him versus 5 terrorists. He succeeds in at least surviving to another moment. He doesn't defeat them. Then it's 10 terrorists. Then it's the most evil terrorist possible, right? It's continuously escalating. His chances are less and less and less. What then happens in this story, and let's see. So this is the story arc, right? And it's going to come to a point of climax, we could say, or we could write the story arc like this. And this is, right, for the protagonist, it's going down, right, into, as I might describe it, the valley of death. They're losing and losing and losing and losing. But what happens is that this little figure here finally essentially explodes with their capacity and essentially their human spirit, however we want to talk about it. It doesn't have to be a massive explosion as in Bruce Willis's movies. It can sometimes be just this little spark, but it's the thing that symbolizes this triumph of the human spirit as the individual essentially triumphs over their adversity. But they triumph over their adversity in a particular kind of way. They triumph over the adversity by merging with the antagonist. This is a little bit, Jay, what I thought about when I read your story. I mean, the simple thing that I was going to address you with is that if we just, again, I go back to these things, we want to try and get the conflict on the page early. We want to establish our protagonist. We want to establish our antagonist. But I've noticed something, and then when I looked at your work, I'm like, well, we have this woman, and then basically the only antagonistic force is this lizard. Well, that's a lizard and a woman. At the end of the day, that woman steps on the lizard if she needs to, right? So that's unequal. But what we want to try and find is we want to try and find her to be the diminished one, and we want her antagonist on the page to be one that really can give her a sense of threat. Yeah, Abhinav, thank you.
So Otis, Deepa has a question, and actually so do I, which is that could you explain merging with the antagonist a bit more, please? And Deepa, if you have anything that you want to add to that.
Right, so I can try. So again, I just go to, I guess, some sort of logical principles. So we have a story that takes place over a period of time. We have a protagonist and an antagonist. I've said before that they must be equal. One cannot be inherently stronger than the other. Though our perception is when we see the child, right, and the parent, I'm just going to use them as examples. The child and the parent, we think the child is weaker than the parent. But the story is about showing, in fact, that the child is equal to the parent. The human spirit is as powerful as all that challenges it. And that's part of what we get out of stories. So, though it appears that they're small and diminished, and the parent is large and powerful, and though it appears that they're even smaller and even more diminished here, and the parent is even more powerful, and even though they're even more diminished here, and the parent is hugely powerful, at the end we realize that the child has this human spirit too, and they are equal to the task of life as it comes at them. That's what we get out. That's what the reader finally gets out of the story, because they're having that experience too. It seems as if life is coming at them and defeating them at every stage. And what the story tells them is that you have a spirit in you that is equal to the task of the world around you. If the protagonist is already stronger than the forces of antagonism at the start, what we have is, at the end of the course of the story, is that the protagonist wins. They simply win. They defeat the forces of antagonism. That's not possible. If the antagonistic force is more powerful than the parent is more powerful than the child in the beginning, at the end, the parent wins. So the only resolution to a story as I see it is that one side, the illusion of story is that one side is going to win over the other. We basically put forward a conflict in the beginning and we say, oh my God, is the kid going to be okay? We feel a sense of threat. Are they going to win? What's going to happen? That's the trick of writing. The basic trick of writing is we establish for the reader the idea that one side will win out over the other. Will it be Bruce Willis or the terrorists? Who's going to win? That's the illusion. At the end, the surprise is neither wins. It is a merger of the two forces. I say that because my logic works like this. It must be so, because for us to truly wonder what's going to happen, it cannot be predetermined in the beginning. It actually has to be who knows what's going to happen. We don't know who is more powerful. We have to create the problem of, I was going to say the problem of this equality of forces. If they're truly equal, the only resolution must be merger. If they're not equal, then the outcome is already predetermined.
So merging of the two, and I'm trying to think in, say, the Harry Potter series, right? How would we define the merging of the protagonist with the antagonist? I mean, leaving aside the whole subtext throughout the series that there was a part of one's power that went to the other and so on, but from a more literary point of view, and similar to the point that you've been making, the merger of the protagonist with the antagonist, how would we see that play out in the Harry Potter series? Or if you can take any other popular fiction that some of us may have read.
Well, I mean, you can take almost anything. So way early on, back, however many years ago when we first started meeting, I talked about this. So I think that there is a split in stories. There's a split between essentially how I term it, propaganda, and maybe more pure stories. So I have this thing that I am representing, in a sense, that it's possible to write hack work, right? So there is a kind of hack work in which you basically set the diminutive protagonist against the large antagonist, but you already know at the end that this protagonist is going to win, right? We know that Bruce Willis, honestly, is going to win at the end of the movie. That, to me, is propaganda. It's not a true story. It doesn't do what stories are truly capable of doing. What they do is they affirm, in that case, they affirm the superiority of the individual, of Bruce Willis, of white men, if you want. Whoever that protagonist is, it affirms their ascendancy over the forces of antagonism, whatever they are. They are superior, but they were superior to the forces of antagonism before the story ever started. All it does is reconfirm their superiority. That, to me, is propaganda. stories that serve the purpose of doing this important thing for human beings, which is to try to affirm for them that in their own lives, they too might triumph, basically to give them hope against the onslaught of the antagonistic forces in their life, does this other more important task, which shows instead the triumph of the human spirit. It's not the triumph of the human spirit to triumph as in they win, but the triumph of the human spirit in that they are equal to the task of life. So I do absolutely, at this point in my thinking, separate two kinds of stories. I have actually quite a large problem at this point in my life with the storyline of Hollywood. I think the storyline of Hollywood, for example, I mean, just as one example, but also all hack writing, in which the protagonist is basically idealized and lionized and cast as the central and superior figure in the world around them. That's what those stories end up doing. And that is a destructive force as far as I'm concerned, personally. Whereas the pure storytelling art is for everybody, right? So when I watch Bruce Willis, I'm like, oh, well, there's a white guy like me and he triumphed over all of these terrorists. Oh, man. And I come out of the theater, I'm like, I'm pumped. You know, I'm like, yes. That's bad. That's bad, actually. That's in psychological terms, that's confirmation bias, right? I walk into the movie theaters and I have confirmation bias. I already have the bias that white men are superior, and then I see depicted in front of my eyes a white man being superior to the forces of antagonism around him. I personally, at this point in my thinking, have a big problem with that. And I think it's a very destructive force. It is, I mean, and as you know, it is, of course, the storytelling force of colonialism too, right? So that's in fact the story structure that I think, can I say, like purer storytellers wish to combat. Those are the people that I personally have in my sights as like my nemesis, my enemies. These are the people that I want to undermine and do something different with. Ram, you had a question?
Yeah, so would the Pride and Prejudice be an example of such a merger? And just to stretch that example a little bit, in Kill Bill, the movie, which obviously is a cult movie, would that also fall into a similar category where you have a protagonist who obviously in both of this, they start off as like, not very large, powerful protagonists. And in the end, it is, at least in Pride and Prejudice, I feel that there is a merger. And in Kill Bill, the way I see it is that the protagonist underwent some violence. And then in the end, she also resorts to a similar violence in the end. So would that be a denouement like that?
Right. So I don't remember Kill Bill exactly, and Pride and Prejudice I've read so long ago that Pride and Prejudice is the.
So Darcy and Elizabeth get married. That's the end of it.
Right.
So yeah, like Deepa is saying, it's a merger in literal terms.
Right. And so Kill Bill, yes, I mean you're right in a sense that it is. We're getting into like a great conversation here. So I also think, so in Kill Bill, for example, the idea that someone who's had violence to them goes on a path in which they basically merge with that violence, right? And become there's an individual who's had something monstrous happen to them. There's been a monster that does something to them. This story of the protagonist and the monster is worth our looking at, okay? Very much so, because we often cast the antagonist as a monster, but then when we do violence to that monster, it doesn't count as violence in the same way as violence counts towards someone who's a human being.
Sure.
Right? So that is also, to me, a pretty dangerous trend.
Sure.
Basically to have the story pattern of dehumanizing the monster and the actualizing of oneself through violence. That is a problematic territory for me.
Right.
The more we see that story, that there is a monster, that it must be dehumanized and destroyed, right? And we arrive at our own ascendancy through the violent destruction of the monster. That we can see is also a problem, maybe. And also a problem in a sense of, we can say, colonialism, of, advancing, white supremacy. I mean, this is, something that we've seen many times. But let's take Darcy and
Elizabeth Bennet.
Emma Bovary. But marriage also, it's that the place of actualization for a woman, for example, let's say in that time period or any time period, is marriage and merger with the husband after contention. Maybe that's a kind of traditional, maybe we want to think about that a little bit too, in terms of basically pushing a kind of, in a sense, pushing a kind of propaganda. Like if we say, like, we actualize ourselves and ascend through violence against the monster, or we actualize ourselves through marriage, right? Maybe that's a kind of propaganda. I'm not sure. What I think what we want to do as writers is we want to stage the antagonistic forces, protagonism and antagonism. We want to stage them, and we want to not know what the outcome is. We want to use the story structure to investigate and reveal life to us, not prescribe life. And the thing is, so like the writers of Kill Bill, I will go again and say they're hacks. Right? Because the only answer they have is the answer that we've gotten so many times: you actualize yourself with violence. The only thing that was unusual about that was that it was a woman actualizing herself with violence. I don't think that's, why is that a good idea? Men actualize themselves, or you could say a white woman. White men actualize themselves with violence against the monster. White woman now actualizes herself with violence against the monster. Is that a better course? A woman actualizes herself with marriage with the man. Is that a good course? I don't know, but it's standardized. And for us as individuals, as writers, I think I do not want to go where others have already gone. That's been done. No one needs me to do that. So no one needs me to do that. I mean, if I'm going to write a story in which a woman actualizes themselves with marriage, why not I say, well, why don't you read Pride and Prejudice instead? How am I adding to the world?
So this is interesting. So what you're saying is that the hero's journey is actually a hack. I'm not judging.
The hero's journey.
Observation.
So No, there's this, because I think that there's a different outcome. So the journey can come to an outcome in which, right? This is going back to the question of merger versus winning and losing.
Right. Correct.
Because, and it's not because, so like we could say that the idea of merger, it could also be hack. Like, so I understand that, and I'm just, I try, I don't know what to do about that right now. But my objective is not to propagandize people and have them believe what they already believe, because my audience is everybody. My audience is not just people who look like Bruce Willis and can identify with Bruce Willis. My audience is every single person on earth who can identify with the issue of struggle against the forces of antagonism, which is the entire world. And I want to give them the sense of hopefulness in the triumph of the human spirit, which is a catharsis for us. That's the role of the storyteller. We're giving people, I mean, it's a kind of a placebo, maybe, but we're giving them something to carry on. That's why people love stories. This is obviously huge, big picture. Jay, thank you for inspiring this talk.
Just one small thing.
One comment.
Please go ahead, Deepa. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Deepa.
Sorry. So, this is amazing. This is like mind bending. Couple of comments or questions. I think my first understanding of when you said the protagonist merges with the antagonist is that similar to Kill Bill, right? At one point of time, your fight against whatever turns you into that monster. So is a question of who am I really? Like the Pandavas versus the Kauravas in the great Mahabharata war, the question that Arjuna had, this is a righteous war, but have I just turned into them? If I have to kill everybody, then who am I? This is the big moral question of the final denouement of who are you? I think you raised that question. So for me, it's really exciting to think about it like this. And also the second point was then you're approaching this whole thing as a philosophical exploration of who you are. You're basically going on the journey with the hero and saying, I'm exploring who I am and how I'm going to respond to what life throws at me. So what came up was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. So there, even though he's in the concentration camp, he does not demonize his captors, or he just very objectively records that and how he overcame that and whatever. But of course, then is it possible in certain genres, for example, in romantic comedy, for example, I want the hero to get together with I want payoff. I mean, I as in the reader, you get into it saying, okay, this is the payoff I want from the get-go. So then it's hacky, but
yes,
then what does one do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so we're dealing with when we're talking about these big story structures, we're dealing with our prime thing that we're working with is anticipation and surprise. Anticipation and surprise. So yes, we go to the romantic comedy and we're hoping that love is going to triumph. We want that, and we want the triumph of the individual. We want those things. Another way, so like in terms, there's a great story. This is a book everyone should read if you're interested in reading short stories, is Raymond Carver's What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And in that book, there's a story called So Much Water, So Close to Home. That story, it's in a woman's point of view and it's written by a man. So we might say, well, I'm not sure how well Carver captures this. But that aside, it shows this idea of antagonistic characters, a husband and a wife, and it results in a merger, but it's not exactly a merger that we go yee-haw about, right? And it's actually the story that sort of brought this more clearly to me, to try to understand the effect of this story. Because at the end of this story, husband and wife do come together. Neither side wins, right? They merge. It isn't, like I say, it isn't exactly yeehaw, you know? We, of course, want to see this, love triumph. We want to have that thing. We want to see Uma Thurman kick everybody's ass and actualize herself in this, glory of blood and power. We want those things. But the question is, for us as writers, should we be giving that to the reader? Right? The other way I think about this with the monstrous one, right? So I had a friend, Leslie Tenorio. He was at Stanford with me, a very, very close friend of mine. And he wrote a great story that you can find, you can look it up, called Super Assassin. It was published in The Atlantic. And it's part of his collection of stories called Monstrous, interestingly enough, maybe working on this theme of the monster. But in Super Assassin, basically you have a kid who's very vulnerable, and he moves on a course in which what I actually term a metamorphosis story. So obviously I'm taking the title of that from Kafka's Metamorphosis. Kafka's Metamorphosis, Gregor wakes up as a cockroach, and it just gets worse from there, right? So, his bed, talk about stories that begin in bed. That's the best one I know. It begins in bed. He wakes up as a cockroach. He's a cockroach, and then he basically is, chased around his apartment by his family. They throw an apple at him that lodges in his shell that starts to rot, and he finally dies. That is a metamorphosis story where he started out here as a living cockroach and he ended up dead. Leslie's story, Super Assassin, is a little bit like this, is like that too. He starts out as a kid who is assaulted by the world, and he ends up being like Kill Bill. He becomes the super assassin. It's a metamorphosis from a state of humanity to essentially inhumanity. Or in Gregor's case, a place of being a living insect to being a dead insect. Right? I grapple, so I can write that story. Do I want to? Do I want to basically confirm what we already feel is the case? Is that my role in this world? I don't think so. I'm not choosing that as my role. So instead, what I do is I look at the story as this. We start with these situations of antagonism and protagonism. We drive the character into a state of, as we could say, the valley of death, in which all illusions have been taken away, and it's just them, human being, quivering, shaking, blah, blah, blah. And I give them a choice. Yes, they have a choice for metamorphosis, to stay in the, Uma Thurman. If she's here and she becomes the monster, isn't she now transformed? Isn't she dead in a sense? She's lost her humanity. I give them a choice. That's my responsibility. But I try as best as I can, and this is where we really want to work as artists. I try to be open. I'm not trying to say what happens. I'm trying to hear what happens as best as I can. What does that mean? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm of that school of thought that the artist is like a conduit. John Keats talks about negative capability. T.S. Eliot talks about impersonality. Many people talk about this kind of thing. Martin Buber talks about I and thou. So I try to see, what are they going to choose? But maybe a little bit, I brought up the illusion of when you shoot a basketball, but then you jump to the side, you want it to go in. I don't think I need to add to the literature that confirms our biases. So I don't want to do that. That is what I bring to it. this going back to this picture, which is still up. So when we have this, the smallest person, so this is, we should see the smallest person being here, right? They have nothing left. They've been diminished, diminished, diminished. What happens? They explode, right? They go outward. They become bigger. That's their triumph. That's a feeling. It's that feeling. So that feeling is very much like Uma Thurman suddenly slaughtering everybody. But that's not how I want to arrive at it. That's the other form of story, which we could say is also a kind of hack work, and certainly people do it, right? It's the phoenix rising from the flames. You rise transformed. You're not the same person that went into the valley of death, right? You're not the same. You had a choice and you changed. This was something I heard so long ago that I've really applied to stories, but to life as well. There is one thing that every character does not want to do. Change. That's it. There's one thing that every person on earth does not want to do, probably. I'm going to say probably. One or two people do. Change. We develop survival strategies in the beginning. We carry them on until we can't. Right? And so the story structure is about this transformative change. I'm trying to think. James Joyce talks about the epiphanic moment. Epiphany, right? Epiphany is rising, ascendancy, this feeling of ascendancy. That is the feeling that we wish to create. It is created both in the hack work and it's created in the work of literature, I think. We'll make a choice about how we write it, but that feeling is clearly very important to people. And I know when I write that feeling and put the time into it, I want to reach everybody with it. If they should open my work, if they should open it, I can't control that. But if I get them to open my work, I want to give them something. I don't want anyone to spend their time with my work where they do not get the best thing that I can possibly give them. Whew. Jay. Jay's probably like, just give me. Jay, are you still here? You're like, oh man,
very much here, yeah.
That was like what was that? Like an ass whooping extraordinaire or what? No.
That was fun.
So the other thing that I want to say about this issue of skin in the game. So when I'm illustrating this here, you know, these things that we see are operating all over the place. And in the biggest movies where people are investing millions of dollars, let's face it, millions of dollars went into making Kill Bill, which I've just now said is hack work, right? When we write our work, Jay, you are a talented writer. Our time is so important. We must realize we're in competition as writers with everyone that will do all of this stuff, no problem. We are in competition with all the hacks that will not, you know, that does not mean we have to write all these big things, explosions and terrorists and all of that. I am not saying that by any means. It's our focus and our attention to what these things mean. As I say, this can be a child and this can be, you know, the evil stepmother, right? Cliche. It can be the everyman versus the totalitarian dictatorship. It can be whatever. It can be a butler confronting the need to put the salad fork next to the entree fork. It can be anything. It can be the tempest in the teapot, as they say, or it can be something that's much larger. When it gets larger, we're working more in the genre category. Smaller, we're probably working more in literature, Chekhov, etc. But we make those choices depending on where our inclinations lie. But we certainly want to take advantage of these I think, essential psychological elements of human beings. What affects us? Jay, is great work. Thank you so much for it. I love the inventiveness. I love Gogol. I mean, I love those stories of the nose. They really influenced me, and those stories also changed the world. So I like to see the echoes of that literary tradition.
Thank you, Otis.
Yeah. Ram, we better get to you. So Ram, my comment here is a simple one, in a sense. Back to skin in the game. If skin in the game finally has as its ramification a physical issue, even if it's emotional, right? My loved one, my partner, like me and Zandi, we are ferociously poking our head out of the cave and wondering whether we are going to kill the caribou and eat tonight, right? So whether it's an emotional problem between the two of us or not, there's finally a physical ramification at the end. When we take these two characters and we remove them with a phone, we have a problem. It's a subtlety, but if we can appreciate the subtlety, then we try and think to ourselves, we don't want that. We want to have them physically close if we can. That's the simplest way I can put it. The phone is a very inadequate, generally, way to inspire tension. But with an exception, actually, that now that I come to think of it, it's an amazing way to inspire tension when the issue is the separation, right? As in, right, when, the horror movie where it's like, things are happening and then the phone rings, like they're like, where are these calls coming from? Where are the calls coming from? Right. And then suddenly it's like, ring, ring, ring. It's like, hello, this is the police. Yes. What's happening? Who's calling me? It's in the house. It's in the, right? So like in that case, the police are here and you're here. The separation is the tension.
Right.
I learned that myself because this is a relationship, right? I go to the things that I know to try and understand things. So I bring up Zandi, again, a little bit, but there was a time when we were separated and something, she was actually on an island, right? She was on an island at a writer's thing. And I was quite a long distance away. And she called me and she said that she had a problem, right? That was very tense. It was a tension that I was not there with her, right? In this case, though, Ram, they're separated, and so we lack that little bit. And I go back to, okay, so I don't want to pretend, I want to go like I'm, writer, I'm, storyteller, and I'm a mercenary. I am a mercenary because I know that I'm dealing with mercenaries. I'm dealing with people who are not going to hold back. I went to Stanford with Adam Johnson. I learned this from him. He brings everything to his work. He does not hold back anywhere. And if you want to see an example, please read his collection of short stories. And we'll see that it's Pulitzer Prize winner of Orphan Master's Son. You can read that story too. You may or may not like his work, but clearly people do, right? And it's partially because he doesn't hold back. So I say that just to encourage us. It's of course easy for us to write things in which there's just a dialogue and a separation of physical space. We don't have to deal with all the other issues that we have. When we write, we should think of, let's put movies, you know, our adversaries are not just storytellers. They're not just writers. They're, of course, movies. We're trying to get people's attention. It's not just even movies. It's also now apps, right? It's also social media. We're trying to take people's time and get them devoted to reading our work. That is becoming a harder and harder thing to do. And so we need to see how all those other mediums succeed, and we have to be willing to do everything that they are willing to do. Interestingly enough, as I read about it, the things that social media does are actually the things that storytellers have been doing all along. Anticipation and surprise. Does that sound like texting a little bit? We're having an issue with my daughter is addicted to texting with her friends. Does it sound a little bit like Instagram? Which I just learned, you know, when you pause doing something on Instagram and you're not scrolling, that it then besieges you with all the likes that you got. It basically collects them until there's an opening and then it hits you with them. Now you're looking at your likes. They're trying to take your time. With my daughter, they're succeeding. So what do I have to do to write a story that my daughter is going to read instead of doing her Instagram? What do I have to write so that my daughter will not watch that baking show and instead read my story? Or see that movie? I mean, the movies are, they're losing. The movies are losing. Who has 2 hours to watch a movie anymore? When your time is taken up on Instagram, and I think about this, so I'm using it as an example for us to understand our challenge. Texting uses the people who are closest to my daughter they're using them as a commodity, right? It's their text. They're producing their own product in order to capture my daughter's attention for a period of time. These are the people that are closest to her, the people who are either going to say, oh, I think you're cute, or I don't think you're cute, right? A lot of skin in the game. We have to be able to do that just as well, right? I've talked many times about the protagonist being the vehicle for the reader. We have to make sure that that really works, right? We have to make them the avatar for that experience. So that now they're having, remember, life itself is kind of dangerous and scary. So now that it can escape to this world and have the same feelings of tension, but in safety, that is a moment of repose in a sense. So we want to think about these things. So anyway, Ram, that's the big message to you.
Yes.
The other way that I put this before is, and I heard it said, I've heard everything said, of course, put your characters into a lifeboat. Put your characters into a lifeboat. And there's actually a great Hitchcock film called Lifeboat.
Okay.
I just saw it. It's available on Amazon Prime, so I might have to watch it with my daughters. I watched that when I was a kid. I was like, oh my God.
I will try this. This is interesting. So I put my characters in a lifeboat and then see what happens.
Yeah. One of the examples of this is Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit as the play. I don't, but again, like that's a play that can strike me as a little bit, I mean, it's so depressing, you know, is that really what I'm trying to provide? You know, I don't think our reader needs the lesson of life is hopeless and then you die. I mean, I think that message comes from a lot of places. So I feel like I have a different message that I need to give to counteract that a little bit.
But this is interesting. So when you mention Sartre's No Exit, that brings to mind this play called An Inspector Calls. You might recall that. I forget the name of the playwright.
I don't think I know it.
It's a wonderful play. This is by J.B. Priestley. Yeah. So it's basically there is one event that has happened, and how each character responds differently to it when they see the threat of imminent danger. And when the threat passes, how they look, each of them looks at it very differently. It's a fantastic play, actually.
Yeah. Well, but you can just see that, you know, let's understand sort of intellectually what we're doing. We are dramatists. A play is a great, drama came first, right?
Yeah,
let's face it, people could not read.
Yeah.
People could not read. So what they had storytellers, oral storytellers, and then they had dramatists, right? What did dramatists bring that sort of was even better than oral storytellers? Well, what they brought was actors, right? So now we have skin in the game. We have people representing human beings interacting with each other. And it's on a stage. The stage is the frame, right? The frame is the lifeboat.
Ah, okay. That's interesting, right?
So whatever it is, we can write, and we can write, you know, whatever frame we want, but let's have a frame and make sure it's a lifeboat, right? We want to make sure we have that. One of the things that happens with yours is your frame is disparate, right? These characters, but you know, but if you saw yours on a stage, right? It's so interesting. If you saw it on a stage, what you would do is you would have a blackout curtain between them, and you would have the two of them talking. Yeah. So then, so when we were witnessing it, we would actually see them closer.
That's right.
And that would give us the feeling of closeness. But as you write it, because we don't have the stage, we see them as separated. It's a nuance. I'm not saying it's not a nuance. I was talking to my daughter about her you know, addiction to her texting and her phone, poor daughter, right? And I was saying, but everyone's addicted to something. I'm addicted to these nuances of language, I guess. I said, I'm addicted to writing. It's just that no one, you know, it's only a problem when it becomes one, I guess. When I just start writing, you know, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. You know, it's only a problem when it's a problem.
Yeah. And when you mention skin in the game, it's very interesting because the way I am seeing that is that in addition to the skin in the game of the protagonistic and the antagonistic forces, that is also what creates skin in the game for the reader. So unless the reader's skin is in the game, he will go back to Instagram and WhatsApp.
Right. So that combines with the other thing that we're going to talk about is the point of view, which is the frame. And Deepa, that's what we're going to talk about with your work, basically. So, like, yes, what we have is this character has skin in the game, but we need to get the reader to be in this character.
Correct.
So that it's their skin in verisimilitude, right? We want to make it as close as possible so that, I mean, with our character, right, we want that skin to be real, not metaphorical, not intellectual, not internal conflict. We want it to be real. Like if it's cut, they bleed. We want the reader to be in that body feeling like if this character is cut, they bleed.
Thank you so much.
I was gonna do, not going to do my famous internal conflict, one-man show.
No, that's very powerful. That's very powerful. I just imagine what an internal conflict would look like on a comic strip. I wouldn't want to read that.
Well, let's do it. I love problems. we figure, but basically what we're doing, right? The internal conflict, the internal and the external are not separated for me as much as I thought anymore in my life, right? So they are reflections of each other. And what we end up dramatizing are internal conflicts, but we dramatize them so that people can understand them. And then the external conflicts are mirrored in our internal conflicts. Are they really truly separated? Is the internal and external separated or not separated? I think the jury's out still.
Unless I'm hallucinating, maybe.
Deepa, let's talk a little bit about this. I would tell me about where you're going with this work, and then I'll just have you read this first paragraph too.
Okay, so this is a first for me, Otis. So I actually had this historical fiction, this really big thing over 1,000 years and all that in my head, and I wasn't getting anywhere with it. So this is something that I've been thinking. My daughter and her two cousins, the two boys. So I call them Sheila, Shalu, Sham, and I keep giving them all these. They are like the great detectives, and I keep giving them stuff to do. To occupy them, and cases to solve and all that. So basically find this, find that, etc. So I've always wanted to turn that into a story, and because I was stuck with my big project, I said, let me just start writing this. So this is basically like your famous five find outers kind of children's detective series, and this is supposed to set the stage, to figure out how these three kids became Sheila, Shalu, Sham, which is not their real names, but their detective names that they get. So, and the idea is that every book is a mini adventure.
Okay, let's. Can you read the first paragraph?
Sure. It all began, like many wonderful adventures do, with boredom. It was the second week of summer vacation, and the three cousins had exhausted the initial burst of manic energy after hours of catching up. Living in the same city, they usually met several times a year. One of them lived in the middle of the city, and two lived in the far suburbs, 30 kilometers away, so their visits couldn't be more frequent than once in a couple of months. So the holidays, when they came a few times a year, were really welcome. It meant they pitched base in either of the households for a few weeks. But this year was different. It had been a brutal year of a strange virus that had kept them and most of the world confined to their homes. Even school had shifted online. It was the year all their teachers had a tech upgrade. Is that okay?
Yeah, sorry, I'm mute on my my microphone, so I forgot. Yeah, beautiful. I think that it is so engaging. Your sentences. I mean, I can see that you really enjoy this writing. I feel like I get immersed in it right away. It all began like many wonderful adventures do with boredom. I think it's a great line. Of course, it's true. I mean, people say a lot of things about the inventiveness of human beings, but boredom is definitely one of them. That it's charmingly written, and so it immerses me immediately. In this, so going back to the sense of frame, so point of view, I don't want to have too complicated a conversation of it. There's always a point of view in every single word. So it's a question of where the author focuses that point of view. Okay, we'll just put that aside. There's always a narrator. The narrator writes every single word on the page. The issue is, do we feel the narrator in the text or not? Right? So I said in a workshop yesterday that I think my highest aspiration as a writer in terms of style is to write as if my writing were a clear pane of glass through which you see the world. To my mind, when you perceive of the narrator, that's perceiving of the glass, right? So I don't really want to do that. I don't want the reader to perceive the glass. I want them to see through. But that is a question of style. So That's not everyone wants to do that. And sometimes there's very good reason to include that narrative voice and have them be present. Here, I can feel you're writing it, you know, you're just starting to go. You're like, okay, I'm going to do it. And you start with sentence 1 and you go to sentence 2. And I love writing like that and producing like that. You haven't made strict choices about how you want to represent the point of view yet. And importantly, differentiate the points of view. You can have, and so what you have, you don't, there's always a point of view in every sentence. And sometimes we say you can have multiple points of view or you have one point of view, but basically what happens is you're moving the point of view around. How much you move it influences the reader's experience. But many writers, of course, move it into a protagonist or sit on the shoulder of the protagonist. And then they go to a narrator. So you have 2 points of view, essentially the protagonist and the narrator. Or you might have several characters. So you have a point of view that's in this character, that moves into this character, that moves into this character. When the point of view moves into a character, it is bound by the physical realities of that character. So it sees ahead, it hears from everywhere, right? It feels things that touch them, right? Basically physical perception. And in this piece, you haven't yet made these choices.
Yes.
Going back to the previous conversation, it's important to make these choices because we have this issue of trying to get the reader, right? We talk about skin in the game, but finally what we're talking about is the reader's skin in the game, because it's the reader's skin that actually is important, because it's the reader's skin that makes them feel tense, right? That's the emotional response, or sometimes at ease. So we basically create, in a way, a kind of breathing pattern. We make them kind of tense, holding their breath, and then, right? We're creating a pattern with our reader's emotional response by having them feel the sense of physical / emotional threat, which, as I've said, is a physical threat in a sense. So without determining that point of view, basically the avatar for the reader's experience, then the reader does not have those feelings of tension. That's the issue. I don't think I've ever said that better or more clearly than right now.
Clear. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, and you have some problems. You know, here you have 3 cousins. Normally the story we don't have any time to spare, I don't think. Today, you know, my daughter is going to get a text any second. So I cannot delay getting her involved in my story.
Right.
We want to set up the protagonist and antagonist in diametric opposition basically as soon as we can at the beginning of our work. And really the next thing we need to do, so that basically creates the issue of what's going to happen, right? That illusion of who's going to win. We know that we're not going to play it that way, ideally, I hope. We don't see the world as winners and losers. We see it as more complex than that. But we want to set up that what's going to happen. And then the next thing we absolutely have to do is, why does the reader care? The reader cares because this person is a human being like they are. So then they move there. This issue of wanting to adopt point of view is so powerful. And you've probably maybe seen it with your own kids. It's like my daughters would watch movies. And I did this too as a child. They will go like that to block the view of the character that they become in the show that they're watching. And then they would determine it. I have 2 daughters. They would argue. My older daughter would be like, no, you cannot be that one, Zoe. That one's me. And I'd be like, you can both be the same one, because I'm like, it's imaginative. No. So it's really fascinating, this deep need for us to learn and want to learn about experiences by being other people. And it's something that in our lives we actually get further and further removed from as we learn this sort of sense of individuality, but it's one that also exists within us. You have a problem if you're presenting a protagonist as cousins. Cousins is a plural. It's hard for us to basically imagine a plurality. Like I used to do this a long time ago, but I would say like, okay, you've written crowds, close your eyes and imagine a crowd. What would it be? So the individual is easier. There's a great example, however, of this plural protagonist written by Anthony Doerr, wrote a collection of stories called The Shell Collector. It is a writer's book of short stories. Jay, also put it on your list. Ram, of course, Abanov. All of us, he is a writer's writer, which means that he's not necessarily going to be the most popular writer. But he's a person who, maybe like me, is compulsive about language and what it does. And in his collection of A Shell Collector, he makes what we might call formal choices that then force his writing to, force his hand maybe. And in one of the stories called 4th of July, he has a protagonist that is a they. They is the protagonist. It's a group of Americans fishing in Slovenia or something like that. Very, very difficult to do because we cannot, as a reader, we cannot imagine and be a they. So how does he compensate for that? He compensates for it by having incredibly strong verbs. The sentences are very forceful, direct, because the noun is weak. He raises the level of the verbs. Does it work as a story? I don't know, but he's testing his muscles, right? He's doing his weightlifting by checking it out. Anyway, I bring it up.
So Otis, sorry, what's the author's name again?
That's Anthony Doerr.
Okay. Got it. I was looking him up on Amazon, and his book is the first one that came up. I'm going to share the link on the chat session. Yeah, thanks.
And the book of short stories, again, a writer's. These were his stories that he worked on through workshops. Very, very talented. Obviously, a compulsive maniac a writer. The Shell Collector is great. The Shell Collector has its primary that story. Well worth reading. The main character is blind. So you see how he's making choices that limit himself. So then what does he do? Read that story. It's a masterclass. So anyway, back here, 3 cousins is difficult for the reasons that we're saying. So I'm not saying don't do it, but know what you're putting on, right? And then how are you going to compensate for it? We writers work in cost to benefit ratio. So is the cost greater than the benefit? We make our choices. All we do, I just reordered this book. One of the most fabulous books, I think, on writing is by Garcia Lorca, his essays. And his collected book of essays is called In Search of Duende. And In Search of Duende is an essay that's well worth reading. But my favorite essay in that collection is about this flamenco dancer. And it's Antonia Merced La Argentina is an essay. And I've looked for it all over the place on the internet as a PDF, so I wouldn't have to buy the book again. And I've never been successful, so I just bought the book again. It's a wonderful essay about this flamenco dancer in the 20s. And the way Lorca describes her is that it's not that she's making the perfect movements. It's that she's not making the millions of imperfect movements all around her. Does that make sense? It's just amazing. And I think of that Indian style of dance too. My mom is kind of fascinated with that, and she sent me a book. You know, the very, very stylized. I mean, you can see how tremendously powerful these dancers are to have these poses. It's just really remarkable. But I was just looking at these photos the other day, and I was thinking that's exactly like Antonia Merced, as Garcia Lorca describes her. It's not that they're making the perfect movement. It's that they're not making all of the wrong movements. I think that essentially perfectly describes the life of the writer. We're doing exactly the same thing. We have to make not all of those wrong movements, but we also have to be easygoing about it. You know, of course, to not make all of them, we usually have to make them first, and we have to experience them and feel them. We have to know where they are. So I don't know. I include that a little bit. The three cousins, I love it. You can also make your choices. So like in this piece, there's a narrative voice that comes in. There's a narrative voice. The narrative voice feels like a mother character a little bit, but is not the mother character because she does show up physically too. But there's this sort of overarching perspective. You can move between them, but you want to make the choices to do so. So sometimes you go into the girl is an actor. So you can either do a couple of things. You can either choose to really solidify on one character and make her the central protagonist, like Harry Potter in the Harry Potter books, the centralized protagonist. That's, you know, through which you basically contain the story. Or you can have the cousins, you can have the different characters, you can even have that overarching narrative voice that you go into sometimes. You just have to make the decisions, separate them out for us. The difficulty of point of view, the difficulty of multiple points of view is, to me, simply this. We go back to the reader's desire to become the character. When we achieve that, we basically, if we change the point of view, we take the reader out of that character and we put him into another character. So then we have all of the same responsibilities. The things that we did to get them in this character, now we have to do it in this character. And now we have to do it in this character. We basically have to do it every time. We have to make the reader be able to go seamlessly into that character, care, and happily exist in that consciousness. So we can see that doing it willy-nilly might, you know, you put them in here, you pull them out, you throw them in here, you pull them out, you throw them in here. In genre fiction, it happens very conveniently. You want to have someone at NORAD and the Pentagon, and you're in their point of view, but then you want to go into the ship's captain in the submarine in the Baltic Sea. Just pull them out, throw them in. They care more about plot than they do about that connection, which is where I emphasize my work. It's just a choice.
Got it, Otis.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Deepa.
No, I got it. I think that's really valid feedback, and I can see how this whole thing will read even better if it's one person and then the couple of cousins come in later, keeping one person main and the whole POV. I like you said, I think I just like got it all down and I didn't bother editing before sending off. But yeah, I think these choices should be more conscious.
Yeah, you know, maybe. Yeah, just it's always maybe. You know, to get that first draft down, sometimes we just need to get the first draft down. Then it's a much different experience when we're, you know, where are we getting that first draft from? Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't feel like we should get in the way of it. Then we have, you know, that's just that. I mean, really, that first invention is a different kind of writing. Then there's the work of writing when we have the words on the page, you know, and And truthfully, as we go through our drafts, we sort of move between those two quite a lot. But we do want to move between them. We don't want to confuse them. We don't want to bring that critic or that intellectual's, issue to that creative process, because it doesn't have any of those things. It doesn't really have any restrictions. But I think this is charming. I have to admit, I like the idea of that plural protagonist of the three cousins, because it has, so I hate to say that, but it's like, it has such of that, the three cousins gives me that, that smallness in the protagonist versus that larger antagonistic world immediately. Like I see them as being that little cabal that deal with each other. Yeah. And then there's the rest of the world, like the mom comes in, the problem of the ring comes in, these various things. So I do like it. So struggle with it. And
okay. I like how you see them as that little cabal. That's how I look at them too. I mean, in real life. So okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, really wonderful work, everyone. I had a lot of fun with it, and it was inspiring.
Thank you, Otis, and request to everyone. So, you have submitted lots of pieces and have got feedback on them. If you have worked on that feedback, and if you have a revised, modified, edited piece that you would like to share as part of your writing submission, I would request all of you to do that, because it will give not only you to get feedback on what the revised piece looks like, if it addresses some of the issues or some of the feedback that was raised by Otis, but in any case, if you don't, then do keep sending in your pieces, and we will talk with you next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.